Hello and welcome back to episode 6 of my Stuarts vlog. Today we've reached the interregnum, or the Republic era, if you prefer. And in this vlog we're going to look at the first part of that, what's called the Commonwealth era, covering the period of the Rump Parliament and then the quite brief nominated or bare bones Parliament after that. And we're going to look at what they did in the first part of the, or what happened in the first part of the this episode, and in the second part, I'm going to try and look probably more briefly at well, what changed, and also why did it not last longer. So, firstly, what happened? Well, in December 1648, you'll remember Thomas Pride comes into Parliament. He's fed up and representative of the army, being frustrated with how Charles I is dealing with Parliament, and how Parliament just keeps going back to him all the time. He says, you know, you're part of the problem now to Parliament. You're part of the problem, not part of the solution. Get out. And that is Pride's purge, and it creates a small rump of Parliament, which then put Charles I on trial and have him executed. That rump of Parliament continues to meet and runs England and Ireland and Scotland during the next 4 years. Initially, there were about 80 MPs that stayed around and were part of the court that tried Charles, and then they are joined by 100 or so more MPs to create a rump of about 200 MPs. At this point, but that said, only about 60 to 70 were regular attenders at Parliament. They are the supreme authority now. No king, obviously, no House of Lords, no bishops anymore, but they do set up in February 1649 a Council of State, and a Council of State was kind of a more a smaller group of 41 councillors. 35 of them were MPs. And then obviously some other people as well. And they were put in place to implement policy under the authority of Parliament. Just a few examples of areas in which the rump did make some impact. First, let's look at religious policy. The church courts were abolished, so that meant the secularization of some previously religious crimes, such as adultery and blasphemy in the Adultery Act and the Blasphemy Act, and censorship was continued to prevent an outpouring of ever more radical religious extremism. And the Toleration Act was passed to end the compulsory attendance at church on Sundays. So in that sense, a fairly a more liberal, more tolerant era of religion began. But there was no real movement towards a state Presbyterian church, and that was, of course, to the frustration of Presbyterians and the Scottish allies that they had. A state church, by that I mean one that existed across the country and was backed by the Parliament. So, church reforms, some progress, but limited. Similar sort of story in legal reforms. The legal system was one of the things that people were hopeful would be reformed in the Republic, because it was seen as expensive. It was expensive. It was complex, and some people saw it as kind of some people saw it as an overhang. That's it, of the Norman era, the Norman conquest, and that kind of undermined traditional English common law stuff. But it was seen as being a problem, and lawyers were seen as being corrupt, and so they set up what's called the Hale Commission under Matthew Hale, who reported that things needed to change, but very few things were actually implemented, and this was actually blamed upon the number of lawyers who were also MPs. People felt that they were corrupt and getting in the way, and that's one of the things that undermines the rump's popularity and legitimacy, I suppose. So church and law, and then for the finance, the rump inherited quite a big deficit from the Long Parliament, and they needed to raise a lot of money. The part of the reason for this also was the ongoing high cost of the military. They continued to be dependent upon the new model army, partly for authority within England, but also more importantly for the conflicts which they were still dealing with abroad, firstly in Ireland, and then also in Scotland, who had decided that actually they were not happy about the execution of Charles I and would rather kind of stick with the royal Stuart line. Both of those were suppressed very successfully by the New Model Army, but they need to kind of keep on it. And then in 1652, war starts with the Dutch, the First Anglo-Dutch War over trade. So for all three of those reasons, military expenditure remained high, and therefore the Parliament needed to keep raising money, which it did successfully, but through setting record levels of taxation, and that's always unpopular. Tax was levied on property, and also through the old sort of tonnage and poundage excise tax on goods and trade. So finance was a problem for them, but a problem not really of their own making on the whole. And they also sell off some crown lands, and royalist property that had been confiscated could be bought back by royalists. And that was also not super helpful in terms of resolving the tensions between royalists and parliamentarians. So for all these reasons, the rump was not particularly well loved by a bunch of people, and crucially, the army starts to fall out of love with the idea of the rump too. Partly this is because it slows down, it's quite cautious anyway, and it slows down the amount of reforms that have been passed. In 1649, it had passed 125 acts. By 1652, it was down to 51. And that coupled with ongoing discussions about how they were going to have elections, and the fear actually that elections might result in an even more cautious and conservative parliament, led to Cromwell dissolving the rump on the 20th of April 1653. Now at that stage he doesn't seem to have had much idea that he would take control of himself or step into the breach, and so after some discussion the nominated assembly is proposed and implemented. This is exactly what it says on the tin, really. It's an assembly of members who were nominated. They could be put forward by their local church, but they were nominated actually by the Council of Officers, the head group of the army, and then they had to be approved by the Council of State. This led to 140 assembly members. About a third of them were from the ruling elite, but a bunch of them were from the sort of lower gentry, minor gentry landowners, showing one of the ways in which the Republic brings about some social mobility, which we'll come back to later on in our course. They meet for the first time on the 4th of July 1653. And during their short period of time, they pass a number of kind of helpful ordinances, 26 in total, including ones that institute civil marriage, meaning that a justice of the peace has to register marriage as well as clergy, and it's not just a church religious affair. The compulsory civil registration of births, marriages and deaths was brought in by the nominated assembly. And there's greater protection for lunatics and their estates. I'm not really sure what the link there was with them, but yeah, good on them. And some relief for impoverished debtors and prisoners. So some worthy things were done, but not really hardcore things that changed the nature or landscape of England at that time. The problem for them was that there were quite radical religious members and also quite cautious landowners in the same nominated assembly, and their agendas often conflicted, and over time it was felt particularly by the cautious conservative group there that it would be better served to end this and pass power over to Cromwell. And so on the 12th of December 1653, a bunch of them kind of turn up early at Parliament and close it down with the help of John Lambert and some of the army, and walk round to Cromwell's and say, right, here is power and authority, and we're handing it over to you. And of course that ushers in the next phase of the Republic, which is the Protectorate under Oliver Cromwell. Now, in your exam, there are sort of two types of questions that you can get on this sort of era, I would suggest. Well, firstly, causes. Well, what caused the era? That's partly really what ended the previous era. So the things that you're kind of looking at, because we this theme is political instability, are why did it not last, and also what changed. If we deal with what changed first of all, there are changes and areas of continuity here, and I would say you want to think about the areas of money, power and religion, just as we did before with Charles. So in terms of power, what's changed, of course, is that there is no more king. And that's a big deal. There's also no more House of Lords. And the other big change is that the army is now much more involved in politics. Pride to Purge, of course, at the beginning of the rump, Cromwell dissolving the rump at the end, two very easy examples of military involvement. And also then being involved in the nominations for the nominated assembly. So power has changed, but also you might argue that power has remained kind of the same, in that you've got a central body which is trying to impose power upon to parts of Britain which don't want it, in Ireland and Scotland. And also there are arguments over the legitimacy of the ruler, in the same way that I mean, not quite the same way, but Charles's legitimacy of the way that he ruled was questioned. Could he rule without Parliament? Was it legit for him to raise taxes in the way that he did? And so here, under the rump Parliament, people question whether the rump is really a legitimate legal parliament because of the way that it came about at gunpoint in Pride to Purge. So power, money, kind of connected really, that there are continuities in terms of creative ways of raising money, high levels of taxation, but also and also questions over the legality of the collection of that, because the rump is not necessarily got the power to do it. And also there's change in that this time Parliament definitely has an input in a way that it has struggled to have under Charles. And then religion. Under Charles I, religion was seen as being something that the central government was imposing, and again you could argue that the central government here is kind of shaping religious policy. However, I think you see probably the biggest change here. There is a more tolerant atmosphere, and of course the Catholic threat is completely now removed. So finally, why does it end? It ends because, or fails, because of the inability of these people to work together, and the inability to find a way of resolving the conflicts that had plagued things up to now, such as that religious tension and the involvement of the military in decision making. Thanks for watching. Next time we'll talk about the Protectorate. See you then.